Good day everyone, and welcome to the channel. It's Londononion here with another Back 4 Blood character build. And the character we'll be building in this video is our newest cleaner, Tala. Now generally I would say cleaners fall on a spectrum of roles/categories ranging from offensive, supportive, and defensive, and of course the degrees in between as we have uncovered throughout the series. Just for consistency, I will define offensive roles and perks as abilities that are directly intended to increase damage or bolster offensive capabilities. Defensive roles and perks will be defined as abilities that directly increase survivability from punishment. Lastly, supportive roles and perks are defined as alternative skills that can be instrumentally used for offensive or defensive purposes without a defined intention for either polarization, but are ultimately a helpful perk for the individual and one's team. First, we will have a brief overview of our chosen cleaner, go through relevant cards that will either synergize or compensate with their attributes, and conclude with what I consider to be the main tactics to maximize the use of their abilities, as well as my closing statements. Now, for those who were present during our weapon reviews and deck builds, each weapon-centered deck build came with character designations. Our format with character builds will be similar, but with more priority to a given character and maximizing their role on a given team. So starting off with the character attributes of Tala. Tala has the unique ability to cause targets to bleed with any physical attack, and this includes the universal bash ability. Bleed damage will also stack a maximum of 10 times. She has an alternative perk of allowing Jeff's Whistle to spawn once per level, which calls an allied tallboy to fight alongside a given cleaner team for 30 seconds. Lastly, she has a team effect of spawning one warped chest filled with a mixed bag of upgrades, weapons, attachments, and accessories. Now in regards to our spectrum, it is the attributes that we will use to designate each cleaner. In Tala's case, I would classify her bleed ability as an offensive perk. Her alternative perk of summoning a friendly tallboy, a supportive perk. And her team effect of a warped chest I will also classify as a supportive perk. This puts Tala on the destructive plane, particularly as supportive offense. Now in regards to card selection, we can compensate with more defensive cards, and we can synergize with more related and compounding cards, depending on needs and playstyle. And naturally, there is the option of creating a mixture or specialization. But if you ask me, a quintessential cleaner is not one that is good at everything, but one that fulfills their role in the best manner to aid the overall effectiveness of their team. So starting ourselves off with her deck build, Tala actually has a strange set of perks that, although fitting on our spectrum, does not lend much of a direction as far as loadout and card selection goes. However, looking at her attributes a bit more critically, she starts off with a bow and inflicts bleed damage. Now, bleed damage, if you ask this onion, mainly comes in useful with mutations and bosses. Going a bit further, round for round, or round for arrow, the bow inflicts the same damage as the Barrett for both general and critical damage. The only difference is the bow is more versatile in shot pattern, and range does not subtract from damage inflicted, but one must compensate the distance with higher aim. Now this is not intended to be a weapon comparison, but this all plays a role in our deck build rationale. Continuing on, the bow is completely silent, both in impact and when firing. Lastly, arrows are infinite. Now technically, anybody can wield a bow, but I think it is worth looking at both their perks and loadout to determine a meta/role-based deck build. Given that Tala starts off with the bow, which can be related to carrying a sniper, inflicts bleed damage, and starts with a Vector, an SMG with high economy but low damage, Tala covers her bases with varied options for eliminating foes. However, this will get us into her role designation, which we will touch on a bit later. Moving on to our card selections, we have Slugger, Brazen, Ridden Slayer, Energy Drink, hyper-focused, high-vis sights, Hellfire, adrenaline-fueled, marathon runner, reckless strategy, stealthy passage, down in front, knowledge is power, hunker down, and belligerent. Overall, Tala's bow stamina efficiency and bow attack speed will increase by 25% and 40% respectively. Her weak spot damage will increase by 110%. Move speed while firing will increase by a grand total of 35% due to hyper-focused, energy drink, high-vis sights, and Hellfire. While crouching, damage resistance increases by a grand total of 5% due to hunker down and reckless strategy. While standing, I'm not entirely sure if health is balanced out since she loses 5% damage resistance but has a health buff of 5% from Slugger. Now, some of my card choices might seem strange, but should hopefully make sense from a synergy and niche perspective. With this build, and from my testing, Tala can for the most part lead with her bow as her primary, while her primary is the secondary/emergency weapon. There was a fair amount of attention paid to weak spot damage, and as we had touched on earlier, the bow can be likened to a completely silent sniper. With her enhanced bow speed, stamina efficiency, as well as the use of adrenaline fueled, she can fire at Ridden without exhaustion. Taking on tough enemies is also made easier since the bow won't draw any attention except from the target itself. With the high damage she can dish out, her bleed damage becomes increasingly valuable, making lighter work of tougher enemies. Looking at our spectrum briefly, Tala was categorized as supportive offense, based on her core skills. With her build now, her offense becomes more of a focus, while her support is more diversified in the areas of utility and failsafes. Now, one of the downsides of this build is that there is no direct health preservation for both herself and her team. Tala's main defense is avoidance and contingency. However, this will lead us into her tactical implications and placement on a given team, which we will get into next. Given everything we have discussed so far, Tala's meta seems to be that of the archetypal assassin, swift, quiet, and hard-hitting, but frail in direct defenses. This mainly comes out with two very crucial cards, Belligerent, among the other offensive cards, and Stealthy Passage. These two wrap up what I would consider Tala's main tactic to be. Given that her bow can suffice as her primary in the face of both weak and tough enemies, while also reserving her primary for emergency use, silence and preemptive/proactive tactics is Tala's main weapon. She can completely clear out a given area without alerting any Ridden and moving at a relatively slower pace. This includes taking out mutations before they can get too close, and bleed damage significantly helps with this. But she can also nullify hazards with a copper incentive. This provides easier passage and directly helps with a common corruption objective while also reducing some of the expense from the rest of her team in purchasing toolkits for said objective. In the case of bosses, Tala becomes an economical choice when using the bow, since her arrows are infinite and her weak spot damage is relatively high. The main danger is of course avoiding damage since she would not be able to withstand much. With all of this stated, Tala is not much of a crowd fighter, and I would say that is her main weakness with this build. Looking at our main areas of difficulty, Tala would be adept in the area of longevity, have some effectiveness in the corruptions corner, but will fall short with crescendos and enhanced Ridden. Her only defense being Stealthy Passage to reduce hazards. In the event of timed hordes, her increased damage from Belligerent will heighten her competence in hordes, but there are of course other cleaners more equipped to handle such circumstances. Tala is just one piece of this cleaner pie. Now, in regards to team placement, I made a bit of a rework to my designations, since there may be some misunderstanding of their use. I've come across numerous terms to describe different roles in conjunction with their associated placement. This is of course open to nuance, but generally this spectrum is a collection of common terms both from myself and others in the Back 4 Blood community. With that said, and everything discussed about Tala, I would designate her in the alpha grouping, as a leader / shot caller. In this Onion's opinion, Tala's strategy works best if she is in the leader position, setting the pace. Otherwise, her intended style with this build becomes almost useless. Additionally, Tala as leader naturally creates a playstyle that is conservative, relatively slow, and highly intentional. With her endless arrows and relatively quiet elimination of foes, plenty of ammo can be saved and more attention focused on tougher enemies. Of course, in the event of crescendos, Tala will have an easier time taking a back seat to a more competent cleaner. Now, slow isn't always best, especially with timed hordes of Ridden, but this is also what Belligerent is employed for, provided of course nobody becomes incapacitated, though at that point, in this Onion's opinion, it's not the card that is failing. Now, some of you might have the critical question, with the way Tala is built, why not just give her a sniper? The answer is multifaceted, but rooted in everything we discussed. What dissuades me from creating another sniper build outside of Jim is the extra demand on ammo as leader, especially using high caliber rounds. As stated earlier, being undetected while delivering high damage with infinite ammo is Tala's strength. An alternative way I like to think of her proposed build and style is like a strange mixture between Jim and Evangelo. She has Evangelo's prowess for longevity, movement, and stamina. Conversely, she has Jim's prowess for making light work of mutations and bosses, but has her own attributes to add with proactiveness and stealth. Metaphorically speaking, Tala could be related to Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games series, Corvo from the Dishonored series, depending on your playstyle of course, and lastly, Legolas from the Lord of the Rings saga. Now, everything in this discussion can be taken with a grain of salt, as I'm sure there are alternative builds out there for Tala. Additionally, the volume of deck build combinations are far too complex for me to fairly evaluate them. However, this is the build I prefer to use when playing on higher difficulties with Tala. Though I would like to hear from the rest of you as to what kind of build you prefer with her. Now, it is paramount to state that team maturity is ultimately what makes any deck work. And for those who were present during our previous cleaner discussions, I'm using maturity as an umbrella term to describe each individual's general understanding of roles, navigation, character and weapon attributes, Ridden/mutation deterrent tactics, resource management, and ultimately collaboration, as this is a team-based game. I would also argue that the greater one's team maturity is, the greater efficacy specializations, like the one we just went through, will have, as each person will have a greater understanding of what it means to operate as a unit without being overbearing or breaking roles. Carrying on, less maturity will likely demand more of a compensating build so as to provide support where there are more deficiencies. However, there is far more to compensate with than there is to specialize with, and would create an unnecessarily long discussion. But this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you guys for joining me on this one, and in our next video, we'll be continuing on with our discussions on cleaner combinations for synergy throughout the given acts. Act 1 is quite lengthy, so it may help to do a revisit with an alternative team. Additionally, as I continue to play with Tala, there will likely be some revisits in the future in regards to alternative builds that may be more fitting for different roles. It's been Londononion, and I will see you guys next time.